Before moving ahead, I'd like to recapitulate few of the topics which we discussed last time. We discussed about globalization and its factors. We discussed about Silk Route, how it links the world. Then we talked about food as an example of long distance cultural exchange. We also discussed about conquest, disease and trade, and then we related it with the biological warfare also. Then we talked about emergence of modern economy. We talked about British corn laws. Then we discussed about large-scale migration at global level. We also discussed about Punjab Canal colonies. Then we talked about role of technology. And we also discussed about late 19th century colonialism in Africa and how Rinderpust led to, controlling the people by the Europeans so easily and how they made the local people to work for them as laborers. And in continuation, I'd like to tell you about Sir Henry Morton Stanley. He was sent by Europeans to Africa. He was a journalist and an explorer, and he mapped the different regions of Africa. And his explorations, his mapping, it helped the Europeans to conquest Africa easily. And whatever geographical explorations he did, they were not driven by an innocent search for scientific information. Actually, they were related to imperial projects. Okay, through these maps, it was quite easy for the Europeans to conquer Africa. This is given in a source in your NCERT book. You can go through it. Then the next topic in line is endangered labor migration from India. Okay. Now the question arises that what is endangered labor? Fine. Now indentured labor is actually a bonded laborer under contract to work for an employer for a specific period of time to pay off his passage to a new country or home. Okay. ये जो लेबर्स होते थे ये कॉन्ट्रैक्ट साइन कर लेते थे फॉर एग्जाम्पल दे यूज टू साइन अ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट फॉर 5 years तो बिफोर 5 years they couldn't leave that plantation or that area where they used to work without permission and there's a lot of exploitation of indentured laborers going on and actually this example, that is indentured labor migration, this is a best example to explain you the two-sided nature of the 19th century world. When globalization was going on, when Europeans were conquesting Africa and Asia, although it led to creation of global world, global economy, it was beneficial for some section of people, but for other section, it was not beneficial. It was painful for them also. So basically at that time, there was faster economic growth going on all around world, but it was bringing disadvantages to some section of people, and indentured labor is one of the example here. Although it meant higher incomes for some people, it was poverty for others. Okay, like the colonizers, they were in beneficial position, whereas the colonies, the people living in the colonies, they were not in that beneficial position. They were being exploited and life was quite difficult for them. And when we talk about indentured labor, in the 19th century, hundreds and thousands of Indian and Chinese laborers, they went to work on plantations, in the mines also, and even to work in road projects, in railway construction projects, all around the world. And there was a lot of exploitation going on of these indentured laborers. And most of these contractual laborers, they were from which regions of India? They were mostly from eastern Uttar Pradesh, they were from Bihar, from central India, and some of the dry districts of Tamil Nadu also. If we see people of Tamil Nadu, there's so many indentured labor who migrated to Ceylon, which is known as Sri Lanka currently. In power sharing, you have discussed about them, Indian Tamils and Sri Lankan Tamils. If you talk about the laborers living in these colonies, who were taken as indentured labor, there were laborers from various regions, like from Indian region, from Vietnam, from Chinese region, who were taken as laborers to different islands, which were colonies of Europeans, like Fiji, Malaya, Ceylon, Mauritius, even in Caribbean islands also, like Trinidad, Guyana, and Suriname. Okay. Now, when these workers, they used to sign the contract, fine. So, actually, they were hopeful for better life. They thought that they'll live a better life, they'll earn their livelihood and they'll live happily. But once they reach these plantations in these colonies, which were an island, far off island, the life was quite difficult for them. They were made to work very hard, they were paid very less, and it was quite difficult situations they were living in. And as they have signed the contract, they couldn't come out of this contract easily. So what happened? These laborers from different regions, suppose let us take example of Caribbean islands, ठीक है? यहाँ पर जो laborers हैं वो Indian origin के भी हैं, कुछ laborers Chinese origin के हैं, and some are Negroes who are from Africa. Then some are local people of the islands. Now all these laborers, when they are living hard life, they'll definitely try to entertain themselves in some or other way. और उस ज़माने में एंटरटेनमेंट के कोई बहुत बड़े साधन तो थे नहीं, जैसे आपके पास मोबाइल है, टीवी है, मीडिया है, तो इनके पास क्या था? कुछ भी नहीं था. So what they did, once the day was over, they used to sing and dance. And when these laborers from different regions are singing and dancing together, what will happen? There will be a mixed form of music. So there emerged a form of mixed culture, composite culture, and chutney music is one of the best example of this mixed culture. Okay, if you listen to this music, you'll find the African music there, even the Chinese music there, even the Indian music, Bhojpuri music it's there. So chutney music is a very good example of mixed culture. Okay, so and when we talk about mixed culture and composite culture, we're talking about global culture, which emerged because these people from different regions, they lived together and they developed a composite culture. Fine. Indentured labor was although abolished in India in 1921 through the efforts of some Indian nationalists. So this is all about mixed culture. Then we talk about Indian entrepreneurs abroad. Okay. Now when we talk about Indian entrepreneurs, दो नाम सबसे आगे आते हैं. One is Shikaripuri Shroff and the other is Natukottai Chetiyar's brothers. Okay. जब भी हम इंडियन बैंकिंग की, ट्रेडिंग की बात करते हैं तो इन दोनों का नाम जरूर लिया जाता है. Okay. Because these people, they had developed a sophisticated system to transfer money over large distances, Fine. And they had even developed indigenous forms of corporate organizations. So even they were able to transfer money till Northern Africa, to European region. So जब भी बात आती है इंडियन एंटरप्रेन्योर्स की तो या इंडियन बैंकिंग सिस्टम की तो इनका नाम जरूर लिया जाता है. Although it was not in a formal way, that was conducted in informal way. Okay, so this is all about Indian entrepreneurs abroad. Then we talk about Indian trade, colonialism, and global system. Now, what was the impact of colonialism on the trade of India and how it affected the global economic system? Okay, अब आप देखो, initially India's textile was quite popular in Europe. इंडिया का जो कॉटन टेक्सटाइल था ना, इट वॉज नोन एज शाही मसलिन, शाही खास, ये बहुत ही फेमस था यूरोप में. ठीक है, कुछ यूरोपियन ट्रेडर्स थे ना जिनका कहना था कि इंडियन टेक्सटाइल की डिमांड यूरोप के मार्केट में कभी भी कम नहीं होगी. बट फाइनली क्या हुआ, जब इंग्लैंड में इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन आया, वहां पर टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्री सेटअप हुई, तो द मार्केट ऑफ इंग्लैंड वॉज फिल्ड विद द प्रोडक्ट ऑफ देयर इंडस्ट्रीज. प्लस उन्होंने इंडियन टेक्सटाइल के ऊपर इंपोर्ट ड्यूटीज भी लगवा दी क्योंकि वो चाहते थे कि उनका प्रोडक्ट बिके उनके मार्केट में. तो फाइनली व्हाट हैपेंड, द एक्सपोर्ट ऑफ इंडियन टेक्सटाइल डिक्लाइंड इन यूरोप. एंड देन द ब्रिटिशर्स, they started opium trade from India to China. What they did, they used to grow opium in this Bengal and Bihar region of India. Then they used to trade it with China. They used to earn Chinese currency. Then they used to pay that currency while buying silk and tea. And silk and tea was taken from there to Europe and it was sold there because Europe में जो urban population थी वहाँ पे काफी demand थी tea की. So finally a triangular trade was going on. Okay, and who was being benefited? Britain. Exploitation किसका हो रहा है? इंडिया का. Okay, and in between what happened, the export of raw cotton increased from India to Britain. If we talk about the period between 1812 to 1871, Export of raw cotton increased from 5% to 35%. And this is also related to civil war in USA. Actually, ब्रिटेन की जो रॉ कॉटन की सप्लाई थी दैट वाज कमिंग फ्रॉम यूएसए, बट यूएसए में जब स्लेवरी के खिलाफ सिविल वॉर हो गई, दिस सप्लाई वाज डिस्टर्बटेड. So the Britishers, they started looking for other option. Now what was the best option for them? India. And India was their colony, so there's no any problem. यहाँ की रॉ कॉटन को आप सस्ते दामों में उठा लो and you can export it to Britain. And they'll use this raw cotton in their industries, make textile, and they'll sell it to India at higher prices. So what happened? India के जो resources हैं, they were used for the development of economy of Britain. ठीक है? And Britain, it always had trade surplus with India. India के साथ वो हमेशा trade profit में रहता था. इसकी वजह से क्या हुआ कि whenever they had trade deficit with any other country, they used to balance it with the trade surplus with India. नुकसान किसका है? इंडिया का, because it is leading to drain of wealth from India. इंडिया का सारा wealth कहाँ जा रहा है? ब्रिटेन में जा रहा है. Okay, so even the British, we can say, they used this trade surplus to pay the so-called home charges also. बेसिकली जो उनके ब्रिटिश ऑफिशियल्स थे इंडिया में काम कर रहे थे, उनकी सैलरी सारा कुछ वो ट्रेड सरप्लस से निकाल रहे थे. दूसरी कंट्री के साथ कोई लॉस है तो उसको भी बैलेंस कर रहे हैं. उनके जो ब्रिटिश ऑफिशियल्स काम कर रहे हैं इंडिया में, उनकी सैलरी भी यहीं से आ रही है. इंडिया का कोई एक्सटर्नल डेप्ट है उसको भी वो उसी से हैंडल कर रहे हैं. बट सफरिंग किसकी हो रही है? जो लोकल पीपल है इंडिया का. Okay, so it also led to drain of wealth from India. And in between, what happened? First World War started. So this war also had impact on the economy of the world, and that we study under interwar economy in this section. अगर हम wartime transformations की बात करें, the First World War was fought between Allied power and Central power. अब Allied power में कौन सी countries थी? They were Britain, they were America, then we had Russia and France. The First World War was fought between Allied powers and Central power. Now, if we see Allied power, you can make a mnemonic बर्फ, and Central power, you can make a mnemonic घाट. बर्फ का full form आप बना सकते हो ब्रिटेन, अमेरिका, रशिया and France. And घाट का आप बना सकते हो Germany, Hungary, Austria and Turkey. So these were the two power blocks wherein the war was fought, and it was won by Allied powers. And this war in its own way affected, the world. If we see, the First World War was the first modern industrial war, because all the things which were used in the war, they were produced in industry through mass production. Even this war, it led to a lot of death and destruction. Around 9 million people died and 20 million people were injured. If you see wartime transformations, what were those? Let us see. This war, as I told you, was the first modern industrial war. Why? Because everything was being produced through mass production. Then you can see the machine guns, the tanks, the aircraft, even chemical weapons. Everything was used on massive scale. And it was all produced through large-scale industries through mass production. Okay? To fight the war, millions of soldiers were recruited from around the world and moved to the front lines on large ships and trains. Even, Indians, there was large-scale recruitment from rural India and British Army. And they were taken to Europe to fight on the behalf of Britain. The scale of death and destruction, if you see, around 9 million people died, 20 million were injured. Okay, and these are the official data. Obviously, the original data must be much more. If you see the impact of the war, most of the people who got killed in this war, they were of working age. They all were young people. Europe lost as almost one of the generation, the younger generation. Then these deaths and injuries, they reduced the able-bodied workforce in Europe. There were very few members within the family who were able to earn. Household incomes also declined during the war. The women, they had to come out and take charge of farms, industries, and they started working. So this First World War, it changed the position of women also in world. During the war, you can see the industries were restructured to produce war-related goods. Entire society they were reorganized for the war, and as I told you, when the men went to battle, the women stepped in to undertake jobs that were done by men earlier, like working in the farms, working in the industries, even in the weapon industries also. So this war, it had enormous impact on European society. And if you see the consequences, Britain, it borrowed large sum of money from US banks as well as the US public. And if we see the first world power of the world, actually it's Britain. Britain became the first world power, we can say superpower, through industrialization. But during First World War, its economy declined. It became international debtor. But US, the war transformed the position of US. US emerged as superpower, as a military power, economic power. And US transformed from being an international debtor to an international creditor. Okay? And as the war ended, the US and its citizens, they owned more overseas assets than foreign governments and citizens owned in the US. So we can say that economically it was beneficial for US, although the rest of the countries, they suffered. Economically also, socially also. Then if you talk about post-war recovery, as I told you, the British economy declined. 1 in every 5 British worker was out of work. And then Britain was burdened with huge external debts. So the position of Britain declined and US emerged as superpower. So this is enough. We'll continue in the next part, the other topics.